Good morning and welcome to Impact Discipleship. We're so glad you're here.
Yes, Saturday morning, the 28th of November 2020, historic days. Today, we continue our journey in the book of Habakkuk or Habakkuk, and we're in chapter 2, and we are going to be reviewing the entirety of the chapter, and we'll be in some cross-reference verses, so I'll tell you where to go. But before we begin, I think it's important, first of all, everybody who's watching online, those of you who weren't here for chapter 1, I encourage you to go back and watch that. Our website, kingdomembassyministries.org, has a drop-down under resources called Impact Discipleship. On there, all the video teachings and the notes are posted. These notes will be up as well. But I have to go back and remind you of the context of what's going on here. And let me do that by reading the first 4 verses of the first chapter, when Habakkuk engages the Lord in what he's seeing and feeling. And it says, "The burden which the prophet Habakkuk saw, O Lord, how long shall I cry?" And I want you to notice the questions that he's asking. How long shall I cry and you will not hear? Even cry to you violence. This is what he's seeing. And you will not save. Why do you show me iniquity and cause me to see trouble? For plundering and violence are before me. There is strife and contention. Therefore the law is powerless and justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous. Therefore perverse judgment proceeds. He's looking out into an earth, into a nation where perversity is so high, where conflict is so horrific, and iniquity is prevailing, consistent sin, is dominating, and he can't understand how God is permitting it to happen. So he's sitting in this place of burden, right? And then I want you to consider that if you were aware, if you're not just tied up in your own world, if you were looking out into the world, I dare say you would be saying that right now. You would have a burden. If the Holy Spirit is in you, your heart would be burdened in a sense of what's going on. And then God says something, which he says to Habakkuk then, he says to us today. He's like, in a moment, he says, Habakkuk, take a breath. And in that space, he fills his heart with something, hope. And he says this. He says, look among the nations, meaning, and watch, and be utterly astounded, for I will do a work in your days that if I told you about, you wouldn't even believe me. So in a moment and a breath, if you're looking on and you feel burdened by what you see, which I think you should feel burdened by what you see, God is saying to you, my child, I see your burden, I hear your cry, sit back, take a breath, and settle your mind. What I'm about to do because of what you are seeing is so outrageous, so astounding, so magnificent, so wondrous, that if I told you what it was, you wouldn't even believe me. That should give you peace. That should give you the confidence, like Yeshua, Jesus said, when he, and I'll quote in Matthew 11, 28 to 30, "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." This is really what Habakkuk is doing. He's saying, Lord, I have a burden. I can't fathom why you're allowing to happen what is happening. And by the way, if you are, why would you let me even witness it? I can't take the burden of watching it. And he says, take my yoke upon you, learn from me. I am gentle and lowly of heart. This is Jesus. And you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. He's lifting that burden off of Habakkuk. Like he's saying this to Habakkuk when he says, don't worry, I got it. Don't worry. You want to say something?
Jeff said a minute ago
you have to use the mic.
Jeff said a minute ago that you should feel a burden, and I'm just curious, with your generation, what are some of the burdens that you guys are feeling in the earth today? Like, I'm gonna just pick on a couple of you, and it doesn't have to be long. Just like,
They're not gonna be able
the
to
fact
hear
that I
anything
don't
unless
get
you
to
hand
go
that
to
around.
school. So really quick, Mika,
They can't hear a word. You have to hand. They can't hear anything.
we're really gonna have to hand this all around.
If you want to do Q&A, you're gonna have to
Okay, so
hand it out.
then just really quick, in one word, without the microphone, one word.
Lying.
You see lying in the earth. Okay. How about you,
Lies.
Ethan?
Toxicity.
Like, what does that mean?
People being rude to each other.
They can't
So
hear.
rudeness. How about you? Manipulation. How about you?
Willing ignorance.
Ignorance. Quick.
I can't think of any right now.
How about you? Ignorance.
Corruption.
Corruption.
Don't worry about me.
How about perversity, like the immorality? Like anything goes.
But
How
we're
about
gonna
you?
get to that.
Quick.
Okay.
What's a burden
do
on your
that.
heart that you're seeing in your generation?
We'll go this way. Get the mic out of her.
What? Self-image. That's a huge one. Yes.
Unrealistic expectations.
That people put on your generation.
Unrealistic expectations.
Okay.
Hypocrisy.
Hypocrisy.
People that are just stuck up and want to be themselves, like
So vanity and like,
vanity, like they're all self-centered.
yeah. But that also comes from insecurity too. It's like a facade. Shiloh.
Self-serving injustice.
Self-serving
That
injustice.
sums it up. Thank you for sharing that. It's good to take a pulse.
So this is what Yahweh says, because we're not, again, you should go back and review the teaching, because what comes after that is a lot of God describing what Habakkuk is seeing. God is saying it. Woe to those who, all through the rest of chapter 1. You should go back and watch that online. But then where we are today, God now is going to give an answer, right, to this burden that Habakkuk is having. He basically says, what you all should do is get out your pencil and write this down, because here's the answer. That's what he's going to say. He says, get out your pencil. So you're in Habakkuk. If you would read for me Habakkuk 2, verses 1 to 4, and put this
Everybody
close
put
enough,
your eyes
like
on it.
there we
Habakkuk
can.
2, 1 through 4.
I will stand my watch and set myself on the rampart, and watch to see what he will say to me, and what I will answer when I am corrected. Then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain on tablets, that he may run who reads it. For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it will speak, and it will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. Behold the proud, his soul is not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith.
So those are the first 4 verses. This is Habakkuk sitting back now. Habakkuk sits back and says, he's presented what's going on, and then he uses this phrase, I will stand my watch and set myself on a rampart, and watch and see what you will say to me, and what I will answer when I'm corrected. This should conjure up in your mind a man of God that's now sitting back and patiently waiting for what God is going to tell him about the prayer and petition he's just put forth. Okay? And this phrase about set myself on a rampart, we learned in the past that a rampart is really conjuring up 2 ideas. In a city, it's either a tower or a watchtower used as a defensive weapon to see what the enemy is going to do, or an offensive weapon that you use to take over a city when you set up a kind of a ramp to go up to get over the wall of a walled city. So he's basically saying, listen, I'm ready to go on the offensive. I'm ready to be on the defensive. I'm going to wait and see. I'm going to wait and see what you're going to tell me, and what my response is going to be, which is what all of you should be doing, right? And he says, I've explained my burden to you. I've put forth my questions. You promised you would do something astounding about it. Now I'm going to wait for your answer. This can be applied in the time and season we live in. It can be applied in your personal life. as we go. And I want you to consider what he's seeing. And I want you to consider this today, as my wife had asked, what is it that you're seeing? I want to offer something to you, which was really part of the teaching last night in our congregation, but it's something I could say every week to you to get you to see the ultimate conflict that we're facing in the world today, in our nation especially. And I want you to consider what Habakkuk would see in our nation today. Had Habakkuk been alive and had he been offering up this prayer today, what would have been about? My wife doesn't see my notes, but she used the word, and what was the word you used? Perversion, right? Listen to this. It would be a perversion of the fundamental belief in God. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The God that Habakkuk is talking to, he would see a perversion of the view of God. Who is that God, and how can we recognize his image? He tells us that we were created in his divine likeness and image. This is what God tells his people. And then he describes that image. Listen very carefully. I made man, I made woman, I commanded them to marry and be fruitful and multiply. That's Genesis. If you're taking notes, that's Genesis 1, 26 to 28. In 2 Peter 1, 3 and 4, he tells us that his power has given us everything we need for a godly life, and thus we have been promised to share in his divine nature. He's telling his people, you are to participate in my divine nature. That's the image of God. So, two absolute undeniable genders, male and female. One absolute union, the marriage of male and female. One absolute command, have children. And one absolute picture, a family. That's what God says his image is. So if Habakkuk was looking on the world today, he would be seeing anything that denies, destroys, or perverts that is blatant blasphemy, claiming a singular statement. If those things are the image of God, what he's seeing is a world claiming there is no God. That's what he's seeing. If you would turn your Bible to Psalm 10, verses 1 to 4. Psalm 10, verses 1 to 4. You have the, who's got the, whoever has it first, let's get it. Are you there? Yeah. Okay, hand it to your sister so she can read, so we don't have so much time wasted. Psalm 10, 1 to 4. Now, this is the New King James Version. I know she has a Bible in front of her that's New King James. So, you can read New King James, and I'll highlight some key interesting clarifications in a few other versions of this. Go ahead.
Why do you stand afar off, O Lord? Why do you hide in times of trouble? The wicked in his pride persecutes the poor. Let them be caught in the plots which they have devised. For the wicked boasts of his heart desires. He blesses the greedy and renounces the Lord. The wicked in his proud countenance does not seek God. God is none of his thoughts.
God is in none of his thoughts. So you see, this looks like David is having the same kind of a view. He's saying, God, why are you standing far back and watching this trouble going on? And then he starts naming what's happening. These proud people, they persecute the poor. Shouldn't you catch them in their own devices? They boast in their heart, and what they're saying, they're wicked. They have this proud countenance on their face, very arrogant countenance. And they say, God is in none of my thoughts, right? The ESV, English Standard Version, says, in the pride of his face, the wicked does not seek him. All his thoughts are, there is no God. You see, you couldn't possibly be doing what those that are doing in the earth, what is so evil to God, could only be doing so is if they thought that there was no God. The Holman's translation has a wonderful nuance. It says, in all his scheming, the wicked arrogantly thinks there is no accountability because God does not exist. You see, you could only be doing these things if you would so arrogantly think, I'll never have to pay a price for it. And I say, if you look at the nations and watch, God says, look at those that are saying there is no God and be utterly astounded, for what I'm about to do in the earth is so outrageous that if I told you, you wouldn't even believe me.
But that could even be an unconscious thought. Like, it doesn't mean somebody is consciously saying, oh, I don't believe there's a God. But if they're living that way, they believe it, but it may not even be a conscious thought. Does that make sense? You know,
Well,
maybe
it's a
they never thought of
it's
it.
a culture. It's a culture. It's not just an individual thought. It's an entire spirit operating in the world. If you look on what's going on today, I mean, if you're paying attention, you might say something like, how could that possibly be? How could something so completely the opposite of truth be believed by so many people? And that is because it's a spirit in operation. It's a spirit of deception, which is declaring there is no God. That's what it's declaring. Okay? So that's the foundation. And if you're suffering, if you're wondering, if you're concerned, if you're burdened, Moses had that same sense. If you turn your Bibles to Exodus 14, Moses kind of had that sense in Exodus 14 when he was up against an Egyptian army chasing him down, and he was backed up against the ocean with no way to go. And he's like, God, what am I going to do? And so if you turn to Exodus 14 and read from 13, just 2 verses, 13 and 14, as Moses translates what God is showing him to the people who are standing there afraid. And watch what God says. I want you to receive this today. This is what God is telling you today.
And Moses said to the people, do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he accomplished for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall see again no more forever.
One more verse.
The Lord will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace. And the Lord said to
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
Oh,
Yeah.
my
And the Lord, you see that? Hey, stand back and watch. Be still, in a sense, and see the deliverance of God. The Lord's going to fight this battle, and the enemy that you see today, you're going to see no more after this. If you pass that down and turn to Psalm 46, 8 to 11. Psalm 46. You're going to see the same thing. Again, I'm just setting a foundation for you to be at peace, even though you might be burdened like Habakkuk. Father, why are you allowing me to see these things? Why can iniquity be so prevalent? You there, Daniel? 46, 8 to 11.
Come behold the works of the Lord, who has made desolations in the earth. He makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and cuts the spear in two. He burns the chariot in the fire. Be still and know that I am God, and I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge.
Be still and know that I am God. I really pray that for you today. If you feel anxiety, you feel burdened. Listen, we only wound up, as you know from the testimony, if you watched the video last week, the last time, we're only here in this prophet Habakkuk because of the tremendous burden that I was wrestling with. I was wrestling with reconciling the utter absurdity of the lies being propagated today, like we live in some third world country run by a dictator, and saying to myself, how on earth can the United States of America be here today? And God led me here to still my mind. Led me to Habakkuk when it opens with the word, the burden that Habakkuk saw. And I said, yes, I have that burden. And then he said, don't worry, I got it. I got it. It's going to be astounding, right? So one more little place before we move back to Habakkuk. Who is up next is the book of Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, and the 6th chapter, starting in verse 5. It's kind of like, if you know the prayer, the waiting prayer that Habakkuk just prayed, he said, okay, God, I'm going to stand and wait and hear what you have to say, and I'm going to respond to the correction. I mean, I'm going to change my mind. Isaiah 6, verse 5. I'm going to change my mind according to your answer, meaning I will come into alignment with your answer. I'm not going to live in my mind around what I think, and I'm not going to wrestle to hold on to my burden. I'm going to correct my thinking according to what you tell me. That's a wonderful heart to have when you're listening to God. So read verses 5 to 8.
So I said, woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a live coal, which he had taken with the tongs from the altar, and he touched my mouth with it, and said, behold, this has touched your lips, your iniquity is taken away, and your sin is purged. Also I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Then I said, here I am, send me.
So this is a burdened prophet, and God is touching his mind and cleansing him so he can be prepared to go forth to do what the Lord has told him to do, right? And God is saying, listen, I'm going to change. I'm going to give you clarity. I'm going to give you clarity and set you on a mission. And then the prophet's saying, I'm ready. I'm ready to go. What would you have me do? Okay? And that's exactly what Habakkuk is doing. He says, I'm standing my watch, ready to be corrected and to do what you tell me to do. And then God says this, the Lord answered me and said, right back to Habakkuk, write the vision down, make it plain on tablets, that he may run with it who hears it. For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it will speak, it will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come, it will not tarry. So he says, here's your assignment. Let's bring this into the present day. I'm going to give you a vision. You need to write it down in simple language so anyone who reads it can understand it. That's what we're doing right here today at this table. Translating that into modern day, simple language, applicable to the times you're living in and the characters that are the players in this play we're watching. Know that the vision I give you will be for a specific time that I've preordained. That being said, do not panic or get disappointed if you think that it has not happened in the time frame that seems right to you. The seeming delay does not mean anything. I absolutely guarantee that it will happen. No matter how it looks and no matter how delayed it appears, rest in this. It will happen. It will happen. If we leave Habakkuk again for a short while and we go to Peter, Peter spoke of this in such a way, looking into the future, about the delay that would inspire those to say things and have doubt when they looked upon it. If you would turn your Bibles to 2 Peter and chapter 2. I'm just going to have, Ethan, I'm just going to have you stay in 2 Peter and read a handful of verses for me, okay? So would you read chapter 2, verse 1 and 2? I want you to see what Peter was seeing and kind of like, hey, little prophetic picture for Peter about what the future looks like and what God might do about it and what those that were seeing it might say about it. 2 Peter chapter 2, first two verses. Start with that.
But there were also false prophets among the people, among the people, even as there will be false teachers among you, who will secretly bring in destructive heresies, even denying the Lord who brought them, and bring on themselves swift destruction. And many will follow their destructive ways, because of whom the way of truth will be blasphemed.
Yeah, the false teachers, false prophets, false, like maybe a whole category of people that think they are worshiping God. They're blasphemous, they're heretics, there's perversity, and yet they would tell you they're worshiping the same God you're worshiping. Oh, it's happening right in your midst. You see it on camera. You see it on camera. We can worship the same God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and we can believe in abortion. We can worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and we can believe in men marrying men, or men marrying toasters. Whatever it is, we can believe in the same God. We can believe in the same God, and we can say that we can change what that God believes and still believe in the same God, right? So he says that's going to be happening in the earth, right? The rest of 2 Peter 2 describes the conditions of such blasphemy, the promise how Yahweh will certainly punish those who are involved in such and certainly deliver those who are godly. Similar promise that he's making to Habakkuk. In the 3rd chapter, Peter reminds us that there will be those who scoff and ridicule these things and these promises. But he also points out that God has a perfect track record of keeping his word. So Ethan, if you would turn, read the next 2 verses in chapter 3. Oh, no, read chapter 3, verses 3 and 4. Next chapter 3 and 4, verse 3 and 4.
Knowing this first, that scoffers will come in the last days, walking according to their own lusts, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation.
And skip ahead to verse 7.
But the heavens and the earth, which are now preserved by the same word, are reserved for fire until the day of judgment and perdition of the ungodly men.
So he's saying some people are going to say, hey, listen, we've been getting away with this so long, I don't think anything's going to happen. I think it's all smoke and mirrors. Your God is not going to punish anybody who's doing these things because of the delay. See, the same thing kind of like Habakkuk was seeing. Tarrying, meaning delaying. God's saying, don't worry if it seems delayed. I got this in perfect timing. And 2 Peter 3:7, he says, reserved for fire in the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. Trust me, God will vindicate himself. And you need to rest in that. Right at the end of that little first 4 verses in Habakkuk 2, so everybody should turn back to Habakkuk. But right at that last verse 4, it says, behold the proud, his soul is not upright in him, but the just shall live by faith. We have this stark contrast of these 2 groups of people, the proud who think they can think what they want and get away with anything, and the righteous who are living by faith. Of course, that little obscure verse sitting in Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 4, shows up in a big way in the New Testament. We don't have to turn there, but let me just tell you, it shows up in Romans 1:16 and 17, when Paul says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it's the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, the Jew first and also the Greek. For in it, the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, quoting Habakkuk, the just shall live by faith. Again, Paul, in his letter to the Galatians, chapter 3, 10 to 12, he says, for as many as are the works of the law are under a curse. Cursed is everyone who does not continue in doing everything that's written in the law of God. But that no one is justified by the law in the sight of God is evidence, meaning you can't do things your own way and think you can be justified by God, because guess what? For the just shall live by faith. Right? That's Galatians 3, 10 and 10 to 12. And then the writer of Hebrews also quotes, we're not really 100% sure who the writer of Hebrews is, but the writer of Hebrews also quotes this when he says, for you have need of endurance, so that after you have done the will of God, you may receive the promises. Right? Endurance. even though things tarry, don't worry about it. God will fulfill his promises. For yet a little while, and he who is coming will come and will not tarry. You see this connection back to Habakkuk? Now the just shall live by faith. But if any man draws back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not of those who draw back to perdition, but of those who believe to the saving of the soul. Meaning, don't be like the ones that Habakkuk was seeing, who thought they can get away with it, and don't be fearful, like Habakkuk originally was, that he couldn't take what he was watching, even though my judgment of those that are wicked has delayed. Don't worry about it. As a matter of fact, if you draw back, you wind up in fear, you wind up in doubt. God has no pleasure in that. So the writer of Hebrews, that's 10:36 to 39. So Shiloh, if we go back to Habakkuk chapter 2 and read verse 5 to 8, this will be the next section that we break down.
I didn't read.
Oh, sorry, Mika.
What am I going to read?
I don't know yet.
Habakkuk 2.
Yeah, 5 to 8.
Indeed, because he transgresses by wine, he is a proud man, and he does not stay at home. Because he enlarges his desire as hell, and he is like death, and cannot be satisfied. He gathers to himself all nations, and heaps up for himself all peoples. Will not all these take up a proverb against him, and a taunting riddle against him, and say, Woe to him who increases what is not his, how long? And to him who loads himself with many pledges. Will not your creditors rise up suddenly? Will they not awaken who oppress you? And you will become their booty, because you have plundered many nations. All the remnant of the people shall plunder you, because of men's blood and the violence of the land and the city, and of all who dwell in it.
So there's a lot going on here, so we're going to break down each of these verses. Again, we're going to apply what God is promising, who he's identifying. He's now describing the ones that Habakkuk is seeing that are the transgressors, the ones living in iniquity, that he can't stand what they're doing. He's describing who they are, and he starts to tell us what he's going to do about it. Okay? So if we go to verse 5, it says, Indeed, because he transgresses with wine. Okay, now mind you, the he is the person, group, people, organization, those participating and being on the other side of the equation, the ones that are basically saying, there's no God and I'm not accountable to anything. Right? That's the he. He transgresses with wine. He's proud. He's a proud man and does not stay at home, because he enlarges his desire as hell, and he is like death and cannot be satisfied. He gathers to himself all the nations and heaps up for himself all the peoples. That phrase, can't be satisfied like death, is like, it's like the evilness can't even fulfill its own desire. There's no end to the well that could fulfill the wickedness. Like it's never ending, right? So present day application, right? And I want you to look out into the earth today. Here we are again, present day application from a perspective living in the United States of America in the 27th? What's today's date again? 28th of November, 2020. We're going to focus on what he means in the present day, okay? And it could seem pretty disruptive, but remember, the answer is don't worry about it, I got it, right? So he says, in order for this system, person, or organization to pull off what they're pulling off, the transgression requires a clouding of sober-mindedness, right? He uses the word drunk, right? He has to make them drunk, meaning the people who will be taken in by this deception need to be as if they're drunk. They can't think clearly, because any clear-thinking person would clearly see that this is ridiculous. in order for them to comply with the deception. The man who heads this up will be full of pride, even to believe he is completely immune from the consequences of his blatant lies. Like we saw in Psalm 10. I'm not going to be accountable because God doesn't exist. He will not stay at home, meaning he will leave his basement bunker and go forth victorious. We see this today with a presidential candidate marching around like he's already won an election that he hasn't won. There's no president-elect existing in the United States as of this date, yet somebody does that. His insatiable desire for power can never be satisfied. He is so blinded with greed and carnal desires that the depths of hell cannot even quench the need to satisfy his flesh. Death cannot even end his desire for depravity. He will build a coalition of nations to agree and support his efforts, for they too are filled with such blatant lies and hatred of Yahweh that they are blinded to the obvious truth that is 180 degrees from their words and actions. This is a very important concept because what we see happening in the world today is nations have surrounded the election of the United States today and congratulated a winner when there is no winner. You can have a rudimentary third grade understanding of history, the Constitution and law in the United States of America, a third grade understanding, and you would realize that the way elections work in the United States, the president is elected by electors, not people. It's not a popular vote, it's electors. The electors have not cast their votes yet. That will not be done until the middle of December. The only way somebody can be the president-elect in the United States is if that has happened, number one, or their opponent has conceded the election because they knew they lost. Neither of those things has happened. So why anybody, any leader of any nation would come along and say congratulations for winning when you haven't won? It's like congratulating a team for winning the World Series after playing one game, but you have to win 4 games. It's almost insanity, right? This leader who's taking on these accolades will build an army of zombie-like followers who have permanently lost their ability to think on their own, nor will they ever again have the ability to distinguish truth from lies. You might look upon what's happening and say, how on earth could anybody possibly believe that? How could you possibly... I'll give you an example. In the state of Pennsylvania, pre-election, the state sent out 1.7 or 8 million absentee ballots to their state. 1.7 or 1.8. In their election results, they counted 2.4 million absentee ballots. Anybody do math here? How could you have 2.4 million people voting absentee when you only sent out 1.8 million ballots? What does that equate to? Cheating. Anybody deny that that's cheating? How could anybody look upon that and not see that that's cheating? But yet, many people say, oh, there's no evidence of that. Oh, you're making that up. Oh, that's not true. Even judges will say, that doesn't mean anything. How could you do that unless you're drunk? How could you do that unless your mind has been infected in a way that you can't see truth? We're not talking about complicated issues here. We're talking about simple issues, right? The next verse starts giving you an indicator of what it's going to look like when the tide turns. Verse 6 says, will not all these take up a proverb against him, and a taunting riddle against him, and say, woe to him who increases what is not his, and to him who loads himself up with many pledges. The these is identifying those that he's drawn to himself, leaders of nations and people and organizations, maybe even the media. This liar or this organization is drawn to them all of these attributes which they've taken that are not his, not their own, stolen. And this is what they're going to do. they'll take up a proverb, meaning this person will become like a laughing stock, a riddle. And they'll say, the very people who were drawn will say, woe to him who has increased what was not his, what did not belong to him. What did we just recognize? What did not belong to this person? The president-elect status, the ability to interact with leaders of nations and accept congratulations. Why are you doing that when you don't own that? Woe to this person who's done this. They'll actually make mockery of him. He's loaded himself up with many pledges. Loaded himself up with many pledges. Meaning, promising to give people offices. Hey, you're going to be my this. You're going to be you're going to be on my team. I'm going to make you this. Hey, I'm going to have this policy. How are you making these promises when you are no more than any other citizen currently? Hey, if he winds up winning, then he gets to do that. Until he wins, he should shut his mouth. It says in Deuteronomy 28:37, and you shall become an astonishment, a proverb, a byword among the nations where the Lord has driven you. Disobedient people become a laughing stock, even to those who have supported them. History will remember this person like they're a joke. But the people won't be able to notice it at first because they're incapable of clear thinking. The person who's doing this is incapable of clear thinking. He cannot speak without being prompted. Do you not see that going on? He can't even reason anymore. It will become obvious that he attempted to hijack a position that was never his, walked about as if he had, acted like he obtained an honorable status, when in fact it was all smoke and mirrors. He'll make all sorts of promises, as if he had the power and authority to make good on them, and worse yet, it will be the very people, the global elite, the organizations, maybe the media, that made him believe he had obtained his position that will be the most critical of his self-deception. Wow. Maybe even his right-hand person, maybe like a vice president, would say, that was corrupt. He didn't deserve that. You remember the vice president partner said about this president-elect when they were campaigning against each other? Called him a racist, called him a womanizer, called him a sex offender. Oh, you want me to be your vice president? Erase all that stuff. That's the kind of deception we're living under today. Those are facts, by the way. Those aren't Dr. Jeff opinions, right? That took place during debates. Will not your creditors rise up suddenly? Verse 7. Will they not awaken who oppress you? And you will become their booty. Promises were made. Many of those to whom these promises were made will say, sorry, buddy, you got to pay up anyway, even though you have no check to cash here. You can't cash this check unless you become president, and if you don't become president, we're still holding you to your promise. How disastrous is that going to be for the person engaging in lies? Do you think that those corrupt conspirators to whom you made ridiculous promises will let you off the hook? Not a chance. Sorry, sir, you wrote a check you cannot cash, and your once friends are now coming to collect. And you will be hunted down until you pay up. Even your entire corrupt family will become owned by those to whom you made promises. Verse 8, because you plundered many nations, all the remnant of the people shall plunder you, because of men's blood and violence of the land and the city, and all those who dwell in it. All those nations that depended on you being able to maintain power, that you hijacked, those that you who gave your family millions of dollars are coming to collect. Yes, your corruption has caused much violence domestically and abroad, and you will be the one to pay the cost. Let's go back to Habakkuk, Shiloh. You should be there. And read verses 9 to 11.
Habakkuk 2.
Yep, Habakkuk 2, 9 to 11.
Woe to him who covets evil.
Wake up.
Gain his house, that he may set his nest on high,
that he may be delivered from the power of disaster. You give shameful counsel to your house, cutting off many peoples and sin against your soul. For the stone will cry out from the wall, and the beam from the timbers will answer it.
You hear this, what he's saying here? Woe to him who covets evil gain for his own household. If you remember what was leaked, or what the accusations have been for a number of years about this man we're talking about, is that he was in cahoots with foreign nationals and foreign businesses for personal gain, even when he was vice president. Lots of proof. Some months before the election, a laptop with all sorts of evidence on it. Real evidence. People, names, dates, text messages, emails. That he was making deals with foreign countries for money. His son was making deals and he was involved. Covets evil gain for his own household. That's what it says in Habakkuk. That he may set his own nest on high and be delivered from the power of disaster. If I make a lot of money, if I make a lot of powerful friends, I'll never get busted. I wonder if there's any evidence of this happening. Who have done so to build his own nest egg. There will be a long history of irrefutable evidence. By the way, you know what that was blocked from? Every news station, every social media outlet. Facebook wouldn't run it. Twitter wouldn't run it. None of the news stations would run it. Yet these same places paid non-stop stories against our president, who they accused of corruption, with not one stitch of evidence. Not one affidavit, not one fact or proof. Nothing. For 3 years, they accused him. This is a boatload of evidence. Thousands of emails, pictures, testimonies, conversations. Nobody says a word. That's the corruption that's going on today. Verse 10 and 11. You give shameful counsel to your own house, cutting off many people, and sin against your soul, for the stone will cry out from the wall, and the beam from the timbers will answer it. Wow. You'll get your own family involved in your corruption. Isn't that what he did? His wife, his son, his brother, all involved. Instead of being a good father and brother and husband, you will be the inspiration for all those around you to become corrupt. Instead of protecting them, you will put them in the direct path of harm and devastation. You will do so because you need others to be your front people of your corrupt schemes. You need others to hold your money as a public figure. All the evidence points to him being involved. All the evidence points to him his family getting money set aside for the big guy. All written in emails and text messages and conversations. And because of this, they will go down with you. The devastation in your family inspired by your greed and corruption will be far and wide. It will feel like an egregious violation against your own self-interest, as if everything you've done has produced the exact opposite of what you desired. The pain will be intractable. Your household will be so infected with disease and greed and corruption that the very walls and beams would cry out if they could. Do you remember what Jesus said? If you don't worship me, even the rocks will cry out. The very house this man lives with, if you can animate the words of what has been witnessed inside his house, the walls and beams and structures of his house would cry out corruption. If they could cry out, they would cry out corruption. Let's move on to verse 12 to 14, Habakkuk.
What sorrow awaits you who build cities with money gained through murder and corruption? Has not the Lord of Heaven's armies promised that the wealth of nations will turn to ashes? They work so hard, but all in vain. Keep going.
Now that's 12 to 14?
Oh, it's 14. All right.
Yeah.
For as the waters fill the sea, the earth will be filled with an awareness of the glory of the Lord.
Listen to this. He builds the cities on bloodshed. Woe to him who builds towns on bloodshed, who establishes a city by iniquity. What went on for months and months and months leading up to this election. An entire side of our nation who cared not about law, who cared not about people's property, who cared not about people's dignity and freedom, shed blood in the streets, burned down buildings, destroyed cities all over our nation. Because of race, because of justice. Can you imagine burning down? Can you imagine if you were a victim? You had a bar, you had a store, you had a gas station destroyed because some crazy people decided they could. Everything you ever stood for will fall on the wrong side of history. You will be remembered as a man who never landed on the side that was right. You will have a path of destruction in your wake, as there is not one thing you stood for that was not birthed in habitual sin. The side of this man who ran for president never condemned those crimes for months and months and months. They sat silent as if it was fine. As a matter of fact, many on that side championed it like it was a right to protest. In the United States of America, you have a right to protest, but you have no right to violence. Peaceful protests. We watched as video behind newscasters said, oh, mostly peaceful protests, why cars and buildings were on fire. Such a deception and corruption that they could say the exact opposite of what was going on, straight-faced, to a camera. Behold, it is not for the Lord of hosts that the people labor to feed the fire, and the nations weary themselves in vain. You will have led so many people to false gods, gods that could never be satisfied no matter what level of devotion. Why? Because it is a vain activity which attempts to satisfy anything that is counterfeit to Yahweh, Yeshua, and the Holy Spirit. Yes, when your religion tells you there's no definitive truth about what a man or a woman is, that marriage is of no value, and that neither is the sanctity of life, then your religion is in effect saying there is no God. The people are laboring in vain. You see the phrase in verse 13, they labor in vain to feed the fire. Much like Elijah when he came against the prophets of Baal, and he said, you think you have a God, true gods? Have them burn up this sacrifice. Dance around. They danced around with all sorts of antics, cutting themselves and celebrating, calling down fire from heaven. And because those gods were fake, nothing happened. Then Elijah mocked them. He said, I'm going to get my God to burn the sacrifice now. But first, why don't you drench water with it all over it a few times? Saturate it with water. Don't even make it like it should burn. And in a moment, the true God consumed the sacrifice with fire. Verse 14, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the water covers the sea. It will be undeniable. Sorry, you scheming liar. The whole world will know who the true God is, Yahweh Almighty, His Son Yeshua, and you will be exposed for the frauds you are. Therefore, God also has highly exalted him and given him the name which is above every name, that at the name of Jesus, Yeshua, every knee shall bow, and those in heaven, and those on earth, and those under the earth, that every tongue will confess that Yeshua, Jesus, is Christ the Lord, to the glory of God the Father. It will be undeniable. Katie, back to Habakkuk chapter 2. Let's read 15 to 18.
Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbor, pressing him to your bottle, even to make him drunk, that you may look on his nakedness. You are filled with shame instead of glory. You also drink, and be exposed as uncircumcised. The cup of the Lord's right hand will be turned against you, and utter shame will be on your glory. For the violence done to Lebanon will cover you, and the plunder of beasts which made them afraid, because of men's blood, and the violence of the land and the city, and of all who dwell in it.
Keep going.
What profit is the image that its maker should carve it, the molded image a teacher of lies, that the maker of its mold should trust in it, to make mute idols?
See, now he's saying, look what you're seeing on the other side. Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbor, pressing the bottle to his lips to make him drunk, so you could look on his nakedness. In order for you to rally support to what you're doing, it has to be that you have to feed those people with something that's so intoxicating that they wouldn't mind if they stood naked before you and exposed themselves in public. They would have no awareness of how deceived they were. You have to get people intoxicated with something in order for them to follow you. Because what you're leading them into is so absurd that no sober-minded person would do it. You are filled with shame instead of glory. You also drink. You, now turning back on the person who's intoxicating the world. You are filled with shame and glory. You also drink and be exposed as uncircumcised. The reference is, if you're going to make the person so drunk and so intoxicated with lies and deceit that they're willing to expose themselves naked, that's what's going to happen to you, and your uncircumcision, meaning you could see that you're not part of God's family, will be exposed to the world. The cup of the Lord's right hand will be turned against you, and utter shame will be on your glory. Everything you've tried to do to glorify yourself, you were seeking to and sucking on the life energy of those you brought under your power, to their utter embarrassment. The intoxicating lies and greed and deceit will be turned around on you, and you'll be forced to drink your own toxic sludge that you forced on others. It will indeed expose everything about you as if you were standing naked before the world. And what will they see? Absolute proof that you are a fraud and the God you serve is a fraud. This is what God is going to do in the earth. Yahweh himself will expose you for the sham you are, and you will be shamed in front of the whole world. This is what he's going to do to his enemies. This is why he's telling us, don't worry. What I'm about to do is so astounding. What I'm about to do is so astounding. But be patient. I'm going to do it. In verse 17, he says, for the violence done to Lebanon will cover you, and plunder the beasts which made them afraid because of men's blood, and the violence of the land, and of all who dwell in it. All your violent behavior will come back to bite you. The fruit it yields will be the exact opposite of what you hoped for. Speaking to this corrupt system, or even person. Every oppressive scheme will be manifested in your own life and will reflect your entire legacy. Everything you tried to pull off is coming back on you. What profit is the image that the maker could carve it? Now he starts talking about, you didn't have the true God. There's a true God on this side here. The God that says, I created man in my image. Male, female, be fruitful and multiply after marriage. The family. Your image of God is something you could carve. A molded image. A teacher of lies. That the maker of its mold would even trust in it to mute idols. Of course, these gods can't speak. They don't even exist. They're pieces of wood and clay and marble, statues and belief systems that are just completely unfounded in truth. Those false gods will be exposed as the powerless gods they are. The religions they represent will be exposed for the fake organizations they are. And yet you, sir, and all those complicit in your operations will be obligated to those false gods for an eternity. Can you imagine God saying, oh, you want that as your God? It's yours. Forever. And finally, the last two verses of Habakkuk, chapter 2.
Woe to him. Woe to him who says to wood, awake, to silent stone, arise, it shall teach. Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, yet in it there is no breath at all. But the Lord in his holy temple,
Let all the earth keep silence before him.
Woe to him who says to the wood, awake! Wake up, wood! Wake up, fake idol! To the silent stone, arise! It shall teach. They're just sitting waiting for their false gods to lead them. Behold, it's overlaid with gold and silver. It's even a fancy one. It's a valuable one. It's not just wood. It's not just stone. We covered it with gold and silver. Yet in it there is no breath. It will not matter how long you beg your false god to respond to you or to guide you or to bless you. It remains dead, speechless. It's a powerless false religion. And finally, in contrast, but the Lord is in his temple. Let all the earth keep silent before him. Yahweh alone sits on the throne. It is not he who remains silent like those false gods. We are the ones that need to remain speechless before him. I don't in any way ever claim, have never been told by God, Dr. Jeff, you're a prophet. The only time you will ever hear me say, thus saith the Lord, although I do think people have the ability to do so. Not me. That's not my thing. I say, thus saith the Lord, if I can read it in the Bible. Thus saith the Lord. That I can say. So when I read this and break this down for you and give you a version of what's going on in the earth, this is a discernment, a spiritual discernment God gives me. It might not be talking about anybody we're seeing today. I'm not saying Habakkuk, way back when he wrote this, was talking about Joe Biden, the liberal Democratic Party, and the lies in the earth we're seeing today, which I could elaborate on for hours. But it certainly looks like it. I'm translating the words that make it look like exactly what's going on in our earth today. That's why earlier I said, before we went on camera, you're living in historic times. A fork in the road in history. I'll end with this. Don't be on the wrong side of history. Father, we come before you. We thank you for this day. Next week, we will, of course, finish Habakkuk by doing chapter 3. But you be glorified, Father. We come in alignment with you. We say, you are the only true God. Anything false, anything deceptive, anything perverted, anything that says there is no God will be exposed in the earth. No matter how long it takes, we will be patient and wait, trusting that what you said is true, that you will do a work in the earth that, had you told us the details, we could not even possibly imagine or believe it. It will be so astounding. In the mighty, mighty name of Yeshua. Amen. Thank you, everyone. We're going to go ahead and shut the camera and see you all next week, same time. Many blessings.